The old pickup truck rumbled to a halt at the gate of the tranquil farm as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Sarah slowly stepped down, brushing dust from her simple cotton dress, and heard something that twisted her heart, the desperate cries of babies coming from inside the house, an urgent wail of infants pleading for care. She only intended to ask for water and continue her journey, but then she saw the man. David appeared on the porch, carrying 2 tiny infants in his arms, one on each side, trying to soothe both at once, swaying his body from side to side. His face was etched with pure exhaustion, his stubble grown out, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes sunken from months of sleepless nights. It was in that moment, seeing the strong man trying to be both mother and father, that Sarah took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change 2 lives forever. "If the Lord allows me to stay, I will care for them." And what seemed like a simple act of kindness on an ordinary afternoon, my friends, transformed into the most improbable and true love story these lands had ever seen. If you believe that, sometimes God places exactly the person we need in our path at the right moment, leave your like now. Subscribe to this channel, Countryside Tales, and activate the bell to receive heartwarming stories. And tell me in the comments from which part of Singapore you are watching us. Let's begin. In the early to mid-20th century, in the isolated outskirts of Singapore, stories like this were not uncommon. The winding dirt track snaked through lush greenery, passing by scattered farms that felt like pockets of old-world charm amidst the vast Singaporean landscape. Sarah had traveled 3 days since leaving the last small town, carrying only a worn leather suitcase, her mother's jade pendant, and the stubborn hope of someone who still believes that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. She wasn't one to cry, never had been. When the fever took both her parents in the same month, she cried for 3 days straight and then dried her tears forever, or so she thought. She worked at MDM Lim's house for 8 months, cooking, washing, caring for the elderly woman, until MDM Lim's heart decided to rest one Sunday morning. The nephews sold everything, and Sarah found herself back on the road with a few coins in her pocket and the painful certainty that there was no safe place in the world for a solitary, familyless girl. David's farm appeared almost by chance at the end of that August afternoon. Sarah was tired, thirsty, her feet aching inside her worn-out sandals. She saw the wooden gate, the old colonial-style house painted white, the small coop with some chickens, the fowls pecking in the yard. It seemed like a prosperous, organized place, the kind of property where help might be needed. She got down from the delivery lorry that had given her a ride, thanked the driver with a nod, and walked towards the gate, mentally rehearsing her words. "Good afternoon, I'm looking for work. I can cook, wash, sew." But the words died in her throat when she heard the crying. It was 2 babies crying at the same time, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the house. Sarah knew that cry. She had helped her mother with neighbors' newborns. She had rocked many infants to sleep. This was a cry of hunger, of wet diapers, of neglect. She clapped by the gate and waited, her heart pounding, not quite understanding why. A few minutes passed until the house door opened and the man appeared. David was tall, broad-shouldered, shaped by hard work on the farm. He had dark, disheveled hair and an expression that blended exhaustion with something akin to shame. In his arms, wrapped in cotton cloths, already yellowed with use, were 2 tiny babies kicking and wailing as if the world were ending. "Good afternoon," Sarah said, her voice firm despite her nervousness. "Excuse the intrusion. I just wanted to ask for some water, if possible." David came down the porch steps, swaying a little, clearly uncoordinated while holding 2 children at once. He had deep dark circles under his eyes, several days' growth of beard, and a shirt stained with regurgitated milk. "Water? There is," he replied, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "But I can't let go of these 2 now. If you'd like, the jug is in the kitchen. You can go in and help yourself." Sarah hesitated only a second before opening the gate and entering the yard. She approached him and saw the babies better. They were twins, a boy and a girl, judging by their different clothes. They couldn't be more than 4 or 5 months old, their faces red from crying so much, their tiny hands clenched into fists. "Are they hungry?" Sarah asked, unable to suppress her instinct. David let out a long, weary sigh. "They have everything. Hunger, dirty diapers, fussiness. I don't know. I don't understand children, miss, I'm trying." But his voice broke, and he looked away, ashamed to admit his weakness to a stranger. Sarah looked around. The house was standing, but the disarray was visible even from a distance. Clothes hung haphazardly on the line. The garden needed weeding. Chickens were perching on the porch. It was the disorder of a man barely keeping his head above water. "Are you here alone?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I am, David replied, trying to rock the babies to calm them, but the uncoordinated movement only made things worse. My wife. She left shortly after these two were born. I have some farmhands who come during the day to help with the crops, but for the house, for the children, it's just me. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of compassion and recognition. She knew what it was like to need help and have no one. She knew what it was like to drown alone trying to manage everything. And there was a man clearly drowning in responsibilities he didn't know how to handle. Without much thought, she extended her arms. Let me carry one of them. David looked at her with surprise. Then, with something like desperate relief, he handed her the girl. Sarah received her firmly, settling the tiny body against her chest, resting the head on her shoulder. She began to rock her slowly, with a rhythmic motion she had ingrained in her memory since helping her mother. She hummed a quiet lullaby, one of those passed down through generations of kampong mothers. The girl, feeling the firm touch and the right rhythm, began to calm down. First, the crying lessened. Then it turned into a broken whimper, until it finally ceased, and the infant rested her little head on Sarah's shoulder, with a sigh. David stood watching as if witnessing a miracle. In 4 months, he had never managed to do that. He had never seen the babies calm down so quickly. How did you do that? He asked, impressed. Sarah smiled faintly, still rocking. Children sense when you're nervous. You're tense, tired. They feel it and get worse. You need calm and to know how to hold them. She looked at the boy in his arms who was still bawling. That one there is hungry. When was the last time they ate? David looked at the ceiling, trying to remember, which was already a sign that too much time had passed. This morning, I think. I tried giving them cow's milk diluted with water, but they spit out half of it. Sarah frowned. Full cream cow's milk is too heavy for babies this small. It needs to be well diluted, warm, and given slowly, with patience. She walked towards the porch, still soothing the girl who was now sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. David followed with the boy in his arms, crying a little less, as if sensing that help had arrived. The kitchen was exactly what Sarah expected, the organized clutter of a man living alone. Dirty pots piled up, food scraps on the table, the traditional charcoal stove with cold ashes. But it had potential. It had structure. Sarah sat on a chair, keeping the girl in her lap, and looked at David with that expression practical women have when they assess a situation and already know exactly what needs to be done. Do you have fresh milk, clean water, a clean cloth for a diaper? David nodded at all 3 questions, still standing, awkwardly rocking the boy. Then I'll prepare their food while you light the stove. Afterwards, I'll change their diapers and bathe them. They need it. David stood there, looking at this woman who had appeared out of nowhere and was taking charge of the situation with a naturalness he hadn't seen in months. He should say no. He should thank her and send her away. After all, he didn't know this young woman. He didn't know where she came from. He couldn't just accept help from a stranger. But the exhaustion was so great, the need so immense, and for the first time in 4 months, he felt that maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone. I can't pay you, he said suddenly, with the blunt honesty of someone who couldn't lie. I don't have the means to hire anyone right now. Money is scarce. Sarah looked at him, at the babies, at the house that needed care. She thought about the road ahead, about the towns where she might find work, about the uncertainties that awaited her. And then she looked at the tired-eyed man, holding a baby who had finally stopped crying, and she knew that this was where she needed to be. If you let me stay, I will care for them, she said, her voice clear and firm. Not asking, not pleading, just offering. You don't need to pay me with money. Give me shelter and food, and let me stay. These babies need a mother, you need help, and I need a home. We help each other. David remained silent, processing her words. It was a proposal too simple to be true, or too generous to be real. He looked at the young woman, trying to read any sign of ill intent in her features, but all he saw was weariness, honesty, and a quiet determination. You don't even know my name, he said, testing her. Nor do I know yours, Sarah, she replied, and yours, David. They stood there, looking at each other, 2 strangers united by need and by the now silent cries of infants. All right, David said finally, surprising himself. You can stay, but it's only until I get things more organized, until I find someone permanent. Sarah smiled faintly, knowing that permanent was a word life rarely honored. All right, she nodded. And so, without contracts, without witnesses, without grand promises, the story of David and Sarah began. She prepared the warm, diluted milk, fed both babies patiently, changed their soiled diapers, and gave them both a warm bath. Using the large basin in the kitchen, humming softly as she washed every crease of their delicate skin. David watched, learning, seeing how she made what seemed impossible to him look easy. When the babies were clean, fed, and sleeping peacefully in their makeshift cradles, Sarah looked around and sighed. "Tomorrow I'll properly tidy this kitchen," she said, more to herself. "And I need to wash all these clothes, and the garden needs weeding." "And tomorrow?" David interrupted, his voice softer. "You've already done too much today. You must be tired from the journey." Sarah looked at him and saw something different in his gaze. Genuine gratitude. "The guest room is at the back," he continued, pointing. "It's nothing grand, but it has a clean bed and a window. You can stay there." Sarah thanked him with a nod and took her suitcase. The room was simple, indeed, but it had a wooden bed with a straw mattress, an old trunk, and a window that overlooked the vegetable patch. It was more than she had had in recent months. She lay down, still dressed, exhausted, and listened to the sounds of the night in the kampong. Crickets chirping, the wind in the trees, the distant lowing of a cow. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah fell asleep feeling that perhaps she had found a place to belong. In the kitchen, David brewed a weak coffee and sat at the table, looking at the cradles where his children slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. He thought of Mei Ling, the wife he had lost so soon, and felt the familiar pain squeeze his chest. But along with the pain, there was something new, a small relief, the feeling that perhaps he would survive this, that perhaps he wasn't as alone as he thought. He didn't know it yet. But that young woman in the simple cotton dress, who had appeared asking for water, was going to change everything. She was going to teach his children to smile. She was going to bring order to chaos, and, more importantly, she was going to teach David himself that the heart has a strange capacity to heal when one least expects it. But that, my friends, was yet to come. For now, on that first night, there were just two strangers under the same roof, united by need and by the silent hope that perhaps, just perhaps, tomorrow would be a little lighter than today. The sun had not yet risen when Sarah woke on her first morning at the farm. Her body ached from the weariness of the journey, but her trained ears caught a sound she knew well, the soft whimpering of a baby waking up hungry. She got up, straightened her crumpled dress, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. David was already there, trying to light the charcoal stove with one hand while holding the baby with the other. The fire wouldn't catch, smoke billowed, the baby whined, and the man had that expression of someone fighting a losing battle from the start. Sarah said nothing. She simply took the baby gently from his arms, gestured for him to tend to the fire, and began to rock little Ethan as she walked around the kitchen. That's how she had learned from her mother. Fewer words, more action. David managed to light the fire on the third attempt and looked back. Sarah was humming softly, the baby almost asleep again against her shoulder, and she was moving pots with her free hand, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He felt something strange in his chest, a mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for the help, guilt for needing it. "Good morning," he said, his voice still hoarse with sleep. "Good morning," Sarah replied, still rocking the baby. "Is there anything for breakfast? Or do you usually just have coffee?" David scratched his grown-out beard, a little embarrassed. "Usually just coffee and a piece of yesterday's bread, if there is any." Sarah frowned disapprovingly. "A man who works on the farm needs to eat well. Do you have rice flour, eggs, palm sugar?" He nodded, and she sighed with relief. "Then today there will be warm kaya toast and soft-boiled eggs. Are you going to work on the farm?" "I need to check on the chickens. Repair the fence by the northern plot that broke with last week's rain. Then go, I'll take care of things here." The ease with which she took charge should have bothered him, but it didn't. David drank his weak coffee, watched Sarah prepare the kaya toast batter with confident movements, and decided to trust. He left for the farm as the sun began to gild the horizon, and for the first time in months, he didn't carry the babies tied to his back in makeshift slings. He left them with her and went to truly work, without having to stop at every cry, without having to rush home every moment. Work flowed differently that day. David fixed the fence, checked the chickens, collected eggs, chatted with the two farmhands who arrived to help with the planting. The men were surprised by the baby's absence. "Did you find a nanny, boss?" asked Mr. Wong, the oldest. "I found help," David replied without giving details. And the men didn't insist, because in the kampong, one learns to respect another's silence. When David returned for lunch, the transformation of the house took him by surprise. The kitchen was clean, organized, smelling of real food. Sarah had prepared rice, stir-fried vegetables, a pumpkin stew with dried shrimp. The table was set with a tablecloth, plates, and cutlery in their places. The babies slept peacefully in the cradles she had moved near the window, where the cool afternoon breeze entered. "Sit down," she said, removing her apron and serving the food. David sat down a little awkwardly, unaccustomed to being served. When he tasted the food, he felt a lump in his throat. It was seasoned perfectly, warm, made with care. It was the kind of food Mei Ling used to make, the kind of food that turns a house into a home. He ate in silence, and Sarah respected that silence, serving herself afterwards and eating, standing, leaning against the counter, as women who don't yet feel ownership of a space often do. "The food is good," David said finally, clearing his plate. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Sarah replied. And after a pause, "I found baby clothes in the trunk in the living room." "They're the twins," David nodded, his jaw tense. "They were my wife's. She made them before they were born. I didn't have the heart to use them." Sarah measured her words before speaking. "If you allow me, I'll wash them and put them on the babies. The clothes they're wearing are very worn." He remained still for a long moment, looking at the empty plate. Using the clothes Mei Ling had embroidered with such love felt like betraying her memory. It felt like admitting that life continued without her. But at the same time, to deny his children, that was to deny them the last gift their mother had left them. "You can use them," he said softly, getting up from the table. "I'm going back to the farm." And he left quickly before Sarah could see the emotion on his face. The days passed at this new rhythm, a routine established without many words. Sarah woke before the sun, lit the fire, prepared strong coffee and ample food, fed the babies, changed diapers, bathed them, sang lullabies while doing household chores. David worked on the farm, returned for meals, saw his children clean and happy, and felt the weight on his shoulders lighten a little each day. He didn't talk much. He was never a man of easy words, but he observed. He observed how Sarah talked to the babies while changing their diapers, explaining each gesture as if they understood. He observed how she sang softly while hanging clothes on the line, old melodies he hadn't heard since he was a child. He observed how she tidied the house carefully, respecting Mei Ling's belongings, without trying to erase her presence. On the 10th day, something happened that David didn't expect. He was on the porch adjusting some tools when he heard laughter, a high-pitched, crystalline baby's laugh, discovering joy. He dropped the leather and rushed inside. In the living room, Sarah was sitting on the floor with her legs crossed, Ethan on her lap. She was making funny faces, hiding her face behind her hands and suddenly reappearing. And the boy laughed. He laughed with that delightful gurgle that babies have. Chloe, lying on a blanket beside them, kicked in the air, trying to get attention. David stood in the doorway, his heart aching in a different way. His children were laughing. In 4 months of their lives, he had never heard that sound. He had heard crying, whimpering, babbling, but never laughter, and there it was, provoked by this young woman who had arrived less than 2 weeks ago and already knew his children better than he did. Sarah noticed his presence and stopped, a little embarrassed. "Excuse me, I was making too much noise." "No," David said, his voice more emotional than he intended. "Don't stop, they're happy." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and went back to making faces. Ethan laughed again, and this time Chloe also let out a giggle. David sat in the rocking chair that had been Mei Ling's and just stayed there, observing this scene that seemed so simple but represented so much. Life re-entering that house, joy filling the corners that sadness had occupied for so long. He didn't know what to call what he was feeling, but he knew it was important, that it was necessary, that it was dangerous, because starting to get used to this meant that losing it would hurt. And David had already hurt too much. The first difficulty arose one afternoon at the wet market in the nearby town. David needed to sell some produce and buy groceries, and Sarah asked to go with him. She needed sewing thread and fabric to make new diapers. All four went. David drove the pickup truck, Sarah beside him, holding Chloe and Ethan in a basket at the back. The town wasn't large, perhaps 50 houses around the community center and the main square. David knew everyone, and everyone knew his tragedy, his young wife lost in childbirth. So, when they arrived at the square, and people saw the widower with a young woman beside him, the gossip started immediately. Mrs. Tan, the provision shop owner's wife, was the first to approach. "David, what a surprise to see you in town. And who is this young lady?" "This is Sarah. She's helping me with the children," he replied formally. Mrs. Tan's eyebrows raised. "Living on the farm." The tone was laden with ill-concealed judgment. "Living," David confirmed, hardening his voice. "Because I needed help, and she needed work." "Is there a problem, Mrs. Tan?" The woman recoiled a little but didn't give up. "No problem. But people talk, don't they, David? A single young woman living with a young widower. It's not good for her reputation or yours." Sarah, who had remained silent until then, spoke for the first time. "My reputation, madam, is that of a hard-working and honest woman, and Mr. David's is that of an upright man raising 2 children alone and needing help. If people want to speak ill of those who work and care for children, the problem is not ours. It is theirs for having loose tongues and empty heads." The response was so firm and quick that Mrs. Tan was left speechless. David hid a smile, and they continued on their way. But the damage was done. Throughout the market, David felt the stares, heard the whispers. The women looked at Sarah with suspicion. The men looked at her with malicious curiosity. He saw when Mr. Chan, the market stall owner, made a comment in a low voice to his assistant, and both laughed, looking in their direction. He felt rage rising, but he swallowed it. It wasn't worth fighting with the whole town. They bought what they needed in silence and returned to the truck. On the way back, Sarah was too quiet. David noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she held Chloe tighter than necessary. "Don't pay attention to what they said," he said once they were on the road. "People in town are like that. They talk about everything and everyone." "I don't care what they say about me," she replied, her voice controlled. "But I don't want you to have problems because of me, if you prefer me to leave." "No." David cut her off faster than he intended. "I don't prefer that. You stay." The silence that followed was different from the others. It carried a weight, an awareness that this situation was not simple, not just boss and employee, not just temporary help. It was something that was becoming necessary, important, and precisely for that reason, dangerous. When they arrived at the farm, Sarah took the babies inside, and David took care of the horse. He lingered longer than necessary in the stable, brushing the animal with slow movements, trying to put his thoughts in order. What was he doing? Letting a young woman he barely knew live in his house, care for his children, occupy the space that had been Mei Ling's. But, at the same time, how could he deny that life had improved? That his children were happy, that he himself was finally able to breathe properly for the first time in months. When he entered the house, the smell of dinner greeted him. Sarah had prepared a beef and vegetable stew. Fresh bread cooled on the table. The babies were in their cradles, clean and satisfied. She was at the sink, washing the preparation dishes, her hair tied in a loose bun, some strands escaping and framing her face. For the first time, David truly looked at her. Not as the young woman who had appeared to help, but as a woman. He saw that she had beautiful eyes, dark and expressive. He saw that her smile, when it appeared, lit up her whole face. He saw that she had delicate but strong hands, hands of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work, and he felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in so long that he had forgotten its name. Frightened by his own thought, he quickly averted his gaze. "I'm going to wash my hands for dinner," he mumbled, and went out to the backyard. They ate in silence that night, but it was a different silence, charged with unspoken things. After the meal, Sarah collected the plates, and David remained watching the fire die in the charcoal stove. "Sarah!" he called suddenly. She stopped and turned. "Yes, thank you for everything, for the babies, for the house, for staying." She looked at him for a long moment, and David saw that she had also thought about leaving. She had considered continuing her journey to avoid problems. "I'm staying because I want to stay," she said finally. "Because here I feel useful, I feel at home. It's been a long time since I felt that way." Her honesty completely disarmed him. He just nodded, unable to say more, and retired to his room. The days continued to pass, and with them came a silent intimacy that neither of them had planned. David began to return earlier from the farm, not because the work had decreased, but because he wanted to see his children awake. He wanted to hear them laugh. He wanted to be present. And Sarah began to ask about the farm, about the crops, truly interested in his work. They began to talk during meals. First about practical things. "I need to buy more fabric. The old hen is brooding." Then about bigger things. He told her how he had inherited the farm from his father, about the years of hard work to make the land productive. She told him about her childhood in the village with her parents, about how she had learned to sew from her grandmother, about the dreams she had had that life had taken away. And one night, almost a month after Sarah's arrival, the moment that would change everything occurred. Chloe had a fever that had started in the afternoon and worsened at night. Sarah had put compresses on her, given her herbal tea, but the baby cried inconsolably, her tiny body too hot. David was desperate, pacing back and forth in the living room, impotence gnawing at him. "I need to go for the community nurse in town," he said, already grabbing his hat. "It's a 2-hour drive, David, and the night is dark. It could be dangerous. I know my daughter has a fever, I know, but the temperature isn't too high yet. If we apply more cold cloths, we'll try to bring it down. If she doesn't improve by morning, then you go." He looked at her. He saw the calm in her eyes, the certainty of someone who knew what she was doing, and he trusted her. They spent the night awake, both of them, taking turns with the compresses, rocking the baby, measuring her temperature with a hand on her forehead. David watched Sarah work with a dedication that went beyond duty, that was pure love. She sang to Chloe, whispered comforting words to her, kissed her warm little forehead with a mother's tenderness. And when finally, near dawn, the fever began to subside, and Chloe fell asleep peacefully, Sarah rested her head against the back of the chair and let out a sigh of relief so deep it made her tremble. David approached, knelt beside the chair. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. "You saved my daughter." Sarah opened her eyes, looked at him so closely, and felt her heart race. "Our daughter," she corrected softly. And then she realized what she had said, and her eyes widened. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No," David interrupted, taking her hand without thinking. "You're right, our daughters. You care for them as if they were yours." And there, in that touch of hands, in that exchanged glance in the middle of the night, something changed forever between them. The morning after that, Vigil dawned differently. The sun entered through the cracks in the window with that golden kampong light, the same light as always, but everything seemed to have changed inside that house. David woke up in the living room chair, where he had fallen asleep from exhaustion, his neck sore from the awkward position. The first thing he did was look at Chloe's cradle. The girl slept peacefully, her breathing calm, no trace of fever. Sarah was already in the kitchen, even after spending the night awake, preparing coffee and kneading dough. When she saw David come in, she smiled, tired but relieved. "Her fever is completely gone. She's fine." David felt his knees weaken with gratitude. He approached the stove. He stood there, not knowing what to do with his hands, with the words that insisted on getting stuck in his throat. "Sarah," he began, his voice lower than usual. "About last night, about what you said." She interrupted him quickly, resuming kneading with unnecessary force, her eyes fixed on her work. "I spoke without thinking, David. I know they're your daughters, that I'm just—" "You're not just anything," he cut her off, surprising both of them with his firmness. "You are the person who cares for them like no one else, who loses sleep over them, who loves them." The word "loves" hung in the air like a dangerous confession. Sarah stopped kneading, her hands covered in flour, trembling slightly. "Yes, I love them," she admitted softly, without looking at him. "I know I shouldn't. I know I have no right, but I can't help it. They entered my heart from the first day." David took another step towards her, so close that he could feel the heat of the charcoal stove, the smell of raw dough, her scent of lavender and care. "And me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Did I also enter?" Sarah finally raised her eyes, and what David saw there made him forget how to breathe. There was fear, yes, but also hope, desire, something so profound it needed no name. "David," she began, but couldn't continue because her voice failed her. He slowly raised his hand, like someone approaching a scared animal, and touched her face with his fingers, still soiled with farm soil, leaving a mark on her fair skin. "I don't know when it happened," he confessed. "I don't know if it was watching you care for my children, or laughing to yourself while hanging laundry, or standing up to Mrs. Tan. I just know that when I think of you leaving, I feel a knot in my chest that I haven't felt since." He didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Sarah understood, since Mei Ling. And that was exactly where the problem lay, in the delicate ghost of the woman who had been wife, mother, mistress of that house. "You still love her," Sarah said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "I will always love her," David replied with brutal honesty. "She gave me my children. She gave me happy years. There's no way to erase that. There's no way to pretend it didn't exist." Sarah nodded, seeing the pain cross his face. "I know. And I would never try to take her place, David. I would never try to make you forget her." "It's not about forgetting," he said, his hand still on her face. "It's about continuing to live. It's about allowing the heart to heal and feel again. You taught me that without knowing it. You taught me that I can honor the past without dying with it." The moment was about to transform into something bigger, into a kiss, perhaps a definitive declaration. When Ethan began to cry in the room, The crying came like a bucket of cold water, bringing them both back to reality. Sarah quickly pulled away, wiping her hands on her apron, her face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. "I'll go see Ethan," she murmured, and almost ran out of the kitchen. David stood there, his hand still suspended in the air where he had touched her face, his heart beating wildly. What he was doing was too soon, too incorrect, too complicated, but at the same time, for the first time in months, he felt truly alive. He felt something beyond pain and tiredness, and that frightened him more than anything else. The following days were strange, filled with a new tension that neither of them knew how to handle. They avoided each other without truly avoiding each other. They spoke only when necessary, but caught themselves exchanging glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. David spent more time on the farm, returning only for meals, eating quickly, and leaving again. Sarah busied herself with the babies and the house, working more than necessary, as if physical exhaustion could silence confused thoughts. It was in this tense atmosphere that the second difficulty arose, and this time it was bigger than village gossip. It was real, it was dangerous, and it came in the form of family. One Thursday afternoon, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the farm gate. It wasn't a car of common people. It was one of those with a subtle family crest, well maintained. David was in the coupe and saw its arrival with surprise and apprehension. From the car descended a woman of about 60, dressed in black from head to toe, with a widow's veil and the posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. It was Madame Lee, Mei Ling's mother. David felt his stomach churn. He hadn't seen his mother-in-law since his wife's funeral. He had avoided visits, avoided conversations. She lived in the city, having left shortly after the funeral, saying she couldn't bear to see the grandchildren who had cost her daughter's life. He walked towards the gate, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "MDM Lee, what a surprise to see you here." The elderly woman looked at him with those cold blue eyes that Mei Ling had inherited, but without her daughter's sweetness. "David," she replied with a minimal nod, "I came to see my grandchildren. I believe enough time has passed for mourning for me to get to know them properly." He opened the gate and accompanied her to the house, his heart heavy. He knew this visit wasn't just about the grandchildren. It was about judging, about assessing if he was raising the children appropriately. When they entered the living room, Sarah was sitting on the floor playing with the twins. Ethan was trying to crawl. Chloe was clapping and laughing. The scene was one of pure domestic joy, but it froze the instant MDM Lee entered. Sarah quickly stood up, adjusting her dress, her eyes wide. David made the introductions in a tense voice. "MDM Lee, this is Sarah. She helps with the children. Sarah, this is the twins' grandmother." The two women measured each other in silence. On one side, the elegant lady in eternal mourning. On the other, the simple young woman in a worn but clean dress. "Helps," MDM Lee repeated, her voice laden with meaning. "I understand. And she lives here in the house?" "Lives," David confirmed, before Sarah could reply, in the guest room. The elderly woman walked towards the babies, knelt with difficulty, and examined them with critical eyes. She touched their little faces, checked their clothes, verified their clean nails, their combed hair. Ethan, always more sociable, smiled at her. Chloe recoiled warily. "They are well cared for," MDM Lee finally admitted, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. "I expected to find them different." Sarah bit her tongue to keep from replying, but David noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Sarah cares for them with great affection," he said. "They are healthy, happy." MDM Lee stood up, brushing her skirt with precise gestures. "Can I speak with you in private, David?" It wasn't a request, it was an order. He looked at Sarah, who was already picking up the babies, and followed his mother-in-law to the porch. Outside, with the door closed, MDM Lee went straight to the point. "How long has this girl been here?" "Almost 2 months. And do you think it's appropriate, David? A single young woman living with a young widower." Rage began to rise, but he controlled it. "It is appropriate when the alternative was to leave my children without adequate care while I work." Sarah arrived when I needed her most. "I'm sure she did," the elderly woman said with a bitter smile. "But appearances matter, David. What will people think? What will they say about my daughter's memory?" With all due respect, Mei Ling Lee, Mei Ling's memory is not being disrespected. Sarah cares for her children with the love Mei Ling would have had for them. She makes the food Mei Ling used to make. She keeps the house as Mei Ling kept it. If anyone is honoring your daughter here, it's Sarah. The silence that followed was heavy. MDM Lee studied her son-in-law's face. She saw the determination there, the fierce defense. "You like her, don't you?" the elderly woman concluded. Not as a question. David didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. You're in love with her. I'm learning to live again, he replied carefully. It's not the same as forgetting Mei Ling, but it's betraying her memory so soon. The accusation was like a slap. David felt his blood boil. Mei Ling would not have wanted me to die with her, Midiam Lee. She wouldn't have wanted her children to grow up without love, without joy, only with a phantom father. Sarah brought life back to this house, and I will not apologize for that. The elderly woman remained silent for a long time, looking at the horizon where the sun began to set. I came here determined to take my grandchildren with me to the city, she confessed finally. I came thinking I would find chaos, neglect, enough reasons to take the children from you. David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. But Midiam Lee continued, turning to face him. I found happy, healthy, loved children. I found a house that works, that has human warmth, and as much as it pains me to admit it, I found a young woman who cares for my grandchildren as if they were truly her own. She paused, her eyes watery for the first time. My daughter chose her husband well. You are a good man, David, and if this Sarah makes you and my grandchildren happy, then perhaps that is what Mei Ling would have wanted. Her voice broke at the end, and the elderly woman had to lean on the porch pillar. David, surprised by her sudden vulnerability, touched her shoulder gently. Midiam Lee, the twins are your grandchildren. You can always visit them whenever you want. You can be a part of their lives. You don't need to take them away to be present. The elderly woman wiped her tears with a lace handkerchief. I know. It's just that I miss her so much, David. And to see these children is to see my girl again. I miss her too, he admitted, his voice choked. Every day, but I've learned that missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. They stood there on the porch, two grieving hearts finding solace in each other, until Med Lee composed herself. I will stay at the guest house in town for a few days. I want to spend time with my grandchildren before returning to the city. But, she looked at David seriously. If you are going to move forward with this young woman, do it properly. Marry her, give her the respect she deserves. Don't let her live in my daughter's shadow as a shamed concubine. The words were harsh, but the advice was sound. David nodded in understanding. When Midiam Lee left, David returned to the house and found Sarah in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she peeled potatoes. She had heard everything. The thin walls of the house held no secrets. She was going to take the babies, Sarah whispered, tears finally falling. She was going to take them, and I would never see them again. David approached, turned her by the shoulders, and did what he had wanted to do for weeks. He pulled her into a tight embrace, letting her cry against his chest. She wasn't going to take them. I will never let anyone come between this family. Sarah clung to him, crying out all the accumulated fear, all the insecurity of not having a right to the children she loved. And David, holding this woman who had become essential, knew that the decision was made. He couldn't postpone it any longer. He couldn't keep pretending that this was temporary. That night, after the babies were asleep and the house was silent, David asked Sarah to sit with him on the porch. He had rehearsed the words 1,000 times in his head, but when he opened his mouth, everything came out simple and direct, as he was. Sarah, you arrived here 2 months ago asking only for shelter and food, but you gave much more than you received. You gave love to my children, you brought order to my house, you gave me a reason to wake up every day. And at some point, between the dirty diapers and the warm soups, you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever, the desire to truly live. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes, her heart in her mouth. I am not a man of pretty words. I cannot promise that I will love you in the same way I loved Mei Ling, because every love is different. But I can promise you respect, care, companionship. I can promise that I will honor you as my wife, that I will defend you, that I will build a life by your side. He took her hand, interlacing his calloused, hard-working fingers with hers. Marry me, Sarah. Not out of necessity, not out of convenience. Marry me because I want you to stay forever, because my children need you, because I need you. Tears streamed freely down her face. Oh, David, I never expected this. I never thought a man like you would notice a girl like me. A girl like you, he repeated with a small smile, is exactly what I need. Strong, brave, loving. So do you accept? And Sarah looked at the house, where 2 children slept peacefully, where she had found a purpose after losing everything. She looked at the man in front of her, who had learned to smile again thanks to her, and she knew there was no other possible answer. I accept, she said, her voice firm despite her tears. I accept to marry you. I accept to be the mother of your children. I accept to build this life together. And when David kissed her there on the porch under the kampong stars, it was a kiss of promise, of a new beginning, of a love born from the ashes and made stronger precisely because of it. The wedding was set for 3 weeks later. Enough time to prepare what was needed without being too long to feed the gossip. David wanted to do things properly, as MDM Lee had advised, as Sarah deserved. It wouldn't be a grand celebration. The farm was still recovering financially, and the recent mourning for Mei Ling called for discretion. But it would be a real wedding, with a celebrant, witnesses, and the blessing of the community. Sarah spent those weeks in a mixture of joy and nervousness that made her wake up in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. She was going to get married, she was going to have a surname, she was going to be legally the mother of the 2 children she already loved as if they had come from her own womb. But along with the happiness came fear. What if she wasn't a good enough wife? What if David regretted it? What if Mei Ling's shadow was too big for her to occupy any space? MDM Lee, surprisingly, became an ally during those weeks. The elderly woman came to the farm every day, spent hours with her grandchildren, and talked at length with Sarah. One of those days, she brought a varnished wooden box and called her future daughter-in-law to sit on the porch. "Sarah, I brought you something," she said, opening the box carefully. Inside was a wedding dress, not white like current fashion, but a delicate light blue with fine embroidery on the sleeves and neckline. "This was the dress I wore when I married Mei Ling's father. Then it was hers when she married David. And now," her voice trembled slightly, "I would like it to be yours." Sarah's eyes widened, touching the fabric with reverence. "MDM Lee, I can't. This dress is a memory of her. It is a memory of Mei Ling, and it will remain so," the elderly woman replied firmly. "But memories are not meant to be locked in a trunk. They are meant to live, to move forward. You are going to marry my daughter's husband. You are going to raise her children. Wearing the dress is not erasing Mei Ling, it is honoring her," continuing the story she began. Tears fell before Sarah could control them. She hugged the elderly woman tightly, and MDM Lee returned the embrace with an emotion she rarely showed. "Take good care of them," the grandmother whispered against the girl's hair. "Take care of David and my grandchildren, and be happy, child. You deserve to be happy." That night, Sarah tried on the dress alone in her room. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked in the small, misted mirror and saw not a substitute, but a continuation, a new opportunity for that dress to see joy, for that house to have love, for those children to have a mother. The wedding day dawned with a blue sky and a fresh September breeze. The ceremony would be simple, at the local community center, only with the necessary witnesses: MDM Lee, Mr. Wong and his wife, and the local pastor who had known David since childhood. Sarah got ready early with MDM Lee's help, who insisted on styling the bride's hair and fastening it with frangipani flowers they had cut from the farm's garden. When she was ready, she barely recognized herself. The blue dress enhanced her dark eyes. Her tied-up hair showed her delicate neck. The flowers gave her a youthful freshness. She was beautiful, she was happy, she was scared. David was already waiting at the community center, wearing the same suit he had worn at his own wedding with Mei Ling. He knew some people might judge him, but for him, it made sense. He wasn't erasing the past, he was building upon it. When Sarah entered the hall, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers, David felt his breath catch. She was beautiful in a different way from Mei Ling, but equally moving. She walked towards the celebrant with a firm step, without a father to give her away, because she no longer had family, but with her head held high, because she didn't need anyone to validate her choice. The ceremony was brief. The pastor spoke of second chances, of the human heart's capacity to love again without diminishing previous love, of how God puts the right people in our path when we need them most. David and Sarah repeated their vows with firm voices despite the emotion. When the pastor declared them husband and wife, and David kissed the bride, some of those present discreetly wiped away tears. It was not a wedding of youthful passion. It was a wedding of maturity, of conscious choice, of a love born from respect and shared life. And in some ways it was even more beautiful precisely because of that. The small reception was held at the farm itself, with a table laden with simple but abundant dishes, prepared by neighbors who had finally accepted Sarah. There was celebratory rice, home-style curry, various types of kueh, and fruit punch. The twins, now 6 months old, were on MDM Lee's lap, dressed in new clothes the grandmother had brought from the city. As the sun began to set and the few guests left, David and Sarah remained alone on the porch, watching the last golden rays of light paint the hills. Sarah had taken the flowers out of her hair and was barefoot, tired but radiant. "So now I'm Mrs. Sarah, David's wife," she said with a shy smile. "It still sounds strange." "You'll get used to it," he replied, putting an arm around her shoulders and pulling her closer. "And I'll get used to having real companionship, someone to share decisions, problems, joys with." They remained in comfortable silence for a few minutes, simply enjoying each other's presence. Then Sarah asked softly, "Do you think Mei Ling would approve of our marriage, that I care for her children?" David thought carefully before replying, "I think she would thank you. Mei Ling was too good to want me to remain alone, suffering. She would have wanted her children to have love, for me to be happy again, and you give us both of those things." The first night as husband and wife was strange and sweet at the same time. David had prepared the room with care. He had changed the sheets, put fresh flowers on the dresser. Sarah entered nervously. She had never been with a man, but David was gentle, patient, respectful. They discovered each other slowly, without haste, building intimacy with care. And when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both felt that this was right, that they were pieces that fit together, not perfectly, but well enough to build something solid. The months that followed the wedding were a period of adjustment and learning. Sarah had to learn to be not only the caregiver but truly the lady of the house, the one who made decisions, who was consulted. Above all, David had to learn to share, to listen to opinions, to accept that he was no longer alone bearing everything. They had disagreements, of course, about how to raise the children, about how much to spend, about MDM Lee's visits, which sometimes stretched too long, but they learned to communicate, to yield when necessary, to argue without hurting each other. And with each obstacle overcome together, the bond between them grew stronger. Ethan took his first steps at 10 months, letting go of Sarah's hand and wobbling 3 steps to David, who caught him in the air with a shout of joy. Chloe said her first word at 11 months, and the word was mummy, looking directly at Sarah. David saw tears stream down his wife's face and understood what that meant. Validation, belonging, recognized love. The seasons passed. Winter came with its cold nights when the family huddled near the charcoal stove, David telling made-up stories while Sarah embroidered baby clothes for the twins. Spring arrived with flowers in the garden that Sarah had planted, with the babies crawling through the yard under their parents' watchful eyes. Summer came with an abundant harvest, with the farm finally prospering again, with plans for the future. And one summer evening, almost a year and a half after Sarah arrived at the farm, the conversation that would change everything again took place. David was on the porch sharpening tools when Sarah sat beside him, with that expression he had learned to recognize. She had something important to say. "David, I need to tell you something," she began, her hands nervous in her lap. He immediately put down his tool, concerned. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" "No, it's not that." She took a deep breath. "It's just that we're going to need a new cradle. The twins are already too big. They need bigger beds." David frowned, confused. "All right, I can make them new beds, but why do we need a new cradle?" "Yes." And then it dawned on him. He looked at her belly, still flat, and then at her face, which was smiling with anticipation. "Are you?" "I am," she confirmed, her voice trembling with emotion and fear. "About 2 months, I think. I went to see the local community nurse today, and she confirmed it." The world stopped for a second. David was going to be a father again, but this time it was different. This baby would be his and Sarah's. It would be the fruit of their mutual love. It would be the definitive proof that life continued. He took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips, laughing and crying at the same time. "A child of ours," he murmured in wonder. "Ours." "Are you truly happy?" Sarah asked, unsure. "I know we didn't plan it, that it happened quickly, that it might be complicated, with the twins still so small." "I'm more than happy," he interrupted. "I am complete. You have given me everything, Sarah. You gave me back my children. You brought joy back to this house, and now you're going to give me another child. How could I not be happy?" They laughed and cried together, embracing on the porch, as the sun set once more over the farm that had seen so much pain and now overflowed with hope. The baby was born one spring morning, when the frangipani blossoms filled the air with their sweet perfume. It was a calm, quick, uncomplicated birth. It was a tiny, perfect girl, with a lock of dark hair, just like Sarah's, and eyes that promised to be clear like David's. They named her Aurora, because she was the new dawn of that family, the light after the darkness. MDM Lee, who had come to help with the birth, held her great-granddaughter with tears in her eyes. "She has Mei Ling's nose," the elderly woman commented. And there was no sadness in her voice, only tenderness. The family continues. And she was right. The years passed, and that family, patched together with fragments of pain and love, grew strong. Ethan and Chloe grew up knowing that Sarah was not the mother who bore them, but the mother who raised them, and they loved her with all the intensity with which children know how to love. Aurora grew up hearing stories about Aunt Mei Ling, who was in heaven, learning that love is not limited, that a person can love many others in different ways, and all are valid. The farm prospered. David, with Sarah by his side, advising and supporting him, made better decisions. He took risks when necessary. He was conservative when he needed to be. They bought more land. They increased the poultry, planted more orchards. The house was remodeled, gaining more rooms, a larger porch, wide windows that let in the sun. But the most important thing was not the material prosperity. It was the laughter that resonated daily in that house. It was the family meals at the large kitchen table. It was the nights when everyone gathered in the living room to hear David tell stories, or Sarah sing. It was the certainty that there was love, there was security, there was a home. MDM Lee visited them regularly, and in her last years of life, she lived in a small cottage David built for her at the back of the property. The elderly woman, who had arrived rigid and judgmental, softened with time. She allowed herself to simply be a grandmother. She allowed herself to love Sarah as a daughter and Aurora as a true granddaughter. When she died at 72, it was in peace, surrounded by the family she had learned to accept and love. Many years later, when David's hair was completely white and Sarah had wrinkles of expression marking her face, they sat on the same porch where everything had begun. Ethan was married and worked on the farm alongside his father. Chloe had become a teacher in the town, living nearby with her husband and 2 children. Aurora, the youngest, had gone to study in the city, but always returned, bringing stories and news. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. "Letting me stay that day?" David chuckled softly, taking her hand and interlacing their fingers, calloused from a lifetime of work. "I regret not asking you to stay sooner, not realizing sooner that you were exactly what I needed. Despite all the difficulties, all the judgments we faced, precisely because of them," he replied. "Because they made us stronger, because they taught us that true love is not what comes easy. It is what is built brick by brick, day after day." Sarah smiled. That quiet smile of someone who knows she made the right decisions. She looked at the farm that had become hers, the house she had filled with life, the garden she had planted and watched bloom. She remembered the frightened young woman who had arrived there asking only for water and a piece of bread, not imagining that she would find a home, a family, a love that would last a lifetime. "If the Lord allows me to stay, I will care for them," she murmured, repeating the words she had spoken so many years ago. David squeezed her hand. "And you did care. You cared for me, for my children, for our house, for our love. You cared for everything, with a dedication I can never fully repay." "You don't need to repay," she said. "You gave me a home when I was lost. You gave me purpose when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it. We saved each other, David. It was a fair deal from the start, and it was true. They had saved each other, 2 broken people who found each other at the right moment and built something whole together. It wasn't perfect. It never is. There were difficult days, there were arguments, there were tears, but there was much more joy, much more love, much more life truly lived." As the sun set once more over Tranquil Farm, painting the sky orange and pink, David and Sarah remained there, hands intertwined, hearts at peace. Their story was not one of overwhelming passion at first sight. It was one of daily construction, of a choice renewed every morning, of a love that grows slowly but takes root so deeply that no storm can uproot it. It was a story of a new beginning, of second chances, of faith that after the darkest pain, a new dawn can always arrive. And if you are listening to this story now, my friends, it is because you need to believe in that. You also need to believe that no matter how deep you have fallen, it is always possible to rise, that no matter how much you have lost, you can still find that true love exists. Yes, but it is not the stuff of fairy tales. It is what is built in the daily routine, in simple gestures, in constant care. And so, my friends, when we open our hearts to start anew, when we have the courage to reach out and ask for help or to offer help to someone who needs it, life surprises us with gifts we never even imagined possible. David only needed someone to care for his children. Sarah only needed a roof over her head. But what they found was much more. They found a family. They found love. They found a home. If this story touched your heart as it touched mine in telling it, leave your like now, subscribe to this channel Countryside Tales, and share in the comments. What was the moment that moved you the most? Was it when Sarah spoke the title phrase? Was it the wedding? Was it Aurora's birth? Tell me. I want to know what stayed in your heart. And always remember, true love doesn't need pretty words or grand gestures. It shows itself in the simple cares of everyday life, in the attentive gaze, in the outstretched hand, in the offered shoulder. Until the next story, and may God bless your life, just as He blessed David and Sarah's. Stay with God.